once again, securing the future of transportation. What is car hacking and why should you care? So my name is Kamel. I'm a graduate of U of M, and I was invited by Sophia to give a talk here on automotive security for you guys. I'm always happy to see students interested in cybersecurity because the earlier you get into it, the more fun it is how I feel. So quick introduction for myself. I am an automotive cybersecurity technology architect at White Motion. The job description I hold is a little bit misleading because I don't actually develop. I'm not a developer, so I don't actually architect anything, but somebody in HR came up with the title and slapped it on me, so I kind of stuck with it now. The company I work for is a subsidiary of Morelli. Morelli is a very large company that used to be two companies and then joined. I have a small slide just to kind of explain why exactly that is, but my company is not the main focus of this presentation. But I'm an international car hacking enthusiast. I used to be an administrator at the ASRG branch in Detroit. ASRG is something I'll talk about later, but it stands for the Automotive Security Research Group. It's an open participation group for members of the industry and academia that are interested in automotive security to collaborate, share knowledge, and essentially just improve their skills in automotive security one way or the other, and it's all free to participate. Right. And I'm also the head of the ASRG chapter here in Japan. If I didn't mention that, I do live in Tokyo. That is probably relevant. So it's about 9 o'clock in the morning for me over here. But yeah, I consider myself a jack of some trades and a master of none. And my recent areas of specific interest include Bluetooth, USB, radio frequency, and digital forensics. And then I have some of my hobbies listed there below, just so I kind of personalize this presentation. So just quick kind of explanation for what my company is, because there's a 0% chance any of you have heard of it. It was a company founded by a French venture capital group in cooperation with a Japanese company called Kamel Ghali, which I can just kind of highlight there. And a couple of years ago, Kamel Ghali, which is a large automotive supplier in Japan, merged with an Italian supplier called Morelli, and now they're together listed under the brand Morelli. So anyway, enough about the company. So what is automotive security and do cars need security? So think about a vehicle, your average vehicle today. What does it do for you? It takes you from place A to place B. Right? You can play your music while you're driving. Maybe you have a GPS installed. Maybe you can connect your phone to it and upload all your contacts, your text messages, and everything else in your phone book, right? But security in vehicles is not something that was relatively well thought of until about maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. So the old cars of the 20th century, if you look, for example, I dropped something. Okay. Is everything still working? Uh-oh.
Yeah, we can hear you. Everything's all good.
Okay. I'm sorry. I pushed something off of my desk. Is the camera still working or no?
No camera, but we see your screen.
Okay. Why is that? Oh. Okay, there we go. Sorry, my bad. Big mistake. Okay, how embarrassing. Anyway. As I was saying, traditionally vehicles are known just to be these mechanical objects that kind of carry people from point A to point B. But over time, especially in the 21st century, we've begun to introduce electronics into vehicles. So now your average car actually has a lot of little computers inside of it, right? These computers, we call them electronic control units, as I have shown up here. These ECUs contain millions of lines of code because the cars are becoming much more sophisticated. They have a lot of functionality. They have a lot of networking going on inside them. There are certain types of specific networks used inside vehicles called in-vehicle networks, right? As intuitive as that is. And the security issue becomes very, very real when you realize that we started to add things like connectivity to vehicles as well. So the vehicle network infrastructure used to be very contained within the vehicle. They didn't talk to the outside world very much. But nowadays you have cars with Bluetooth, of course. Bluetooth is pretty prominent in vehicles all over the world. You've got Wi-Fi in cars. So this means your car can connect to your house Wi-Fi to download updates for software, etc. Maybe you can even use a web browser if you wanted to watch YouTube in your car. But your car can also be used as a Wi-Fi hotspot on the go. A lot of cars equipped with cellular data, right? So an actual SIM card inside a telematics unit will be able to act as a Wi-Fi hotspot for the passengers in the vehicle, similar to how you can turn your Wi-Fi hotspot on for your phone and all your friends can connect to your phone and share your data and access the internet. So all of these different attack surfaces are being added to vehicles. And at some point in the last 10 years, a couple of researchers realized, like, oh, hold on a second, like there's all this cool connectivity, and it's directly linked to some of the controllers in the vehicle, some of the ECUs in the car that actually control its operation, right? So I don't have a specific slide dedicated to this exactly, but we'll see later on some recent car hacks and some things or events in recent history, that have kind of accelerated the growth of this industry. So it is a very booming new field in the automotive industry because of how important it is. And a lot of legislation and industry regulations are being drafted around automotive security to make sure that automotive manufacturers and their suppliers are taking the right steps to ensure that vehicles that go onto the streets in the coming years are going to be secure and safe from any possibility of a hacker taking control, or even not even like control and kind of going on like a rampage with a stolen vehicle remotely, right? It can be even espionage or theft of personal data, or there's any number of things you can do once you've compromised a vehicle, right? It's all up to your imagination at that point. So the field of automotive security has been based around protecting vehicles from these kinds of threats. And it's something that has to be applied to every layer of the automotive development process. Right? So the automotive industry is traditionally a very slow industry, right? The manufacturers will usually take several years ahead of time before vehicles are released to actually begin designing the vehicle, and they have different phases of development. I'd be lying if I said I was an expert in all the different development phases of the automotive industry, just because it's a little bit different for each OEM, and how they interact with the different suppliers is very different too. The automotive security aspect is very difficult because it needs to address the OEMs themselves as well as the suppliers, right? Because if I'm an OEM and I'm saying, okay, I want to build a car, I'm going to commission this product from this supplier, right? Okay, well, obviously I need to make sure that this supplier has put in some effort to make sure that their vehicle is secure, right? So I'll say like, hey, would you please make sure you do cybersecurity checks before you send your device over to me? Okay, sure, we developed it, and then we had some cybersecurity checks, right? But what they won't say is, well, we also had to buy some open source, or we also have to buy some software from a different vendor, and maybe we left out the fact that cybersecurity was important, right? So the supply chain is a huge issue in the automotive cybersecurity landscape, because there are so many automotive suppliers in the world, tier 1 suppliers, tier 2 suppliers, even the silicon chip manufacturers. Each of these has a role in the cybersecurity process, and it's not trivial to manage the development process to make sure it includes cybersecurity for all these different companies, right? All these different companies want to make a profit, and at the end of the day, cybersecurity is not something that you make money from, in the sense that you get more money for your product by making sure it is extra super duper cyber secure. At the end of the day, people buy functionality. And that's why it's taken some time for security to be adopted in the automotive industry, because it's not seen as like a feature or something that they can claim makes their product work better. All it does is protect it from being exploited, which then it's an incentive for the company. Of course, you don't want to be sued for millions of dollars, which I have a small example later. Well, not really getting sued, but recalling vehicles costing your company millions and millions of dollars, and brand reputation damage is very severe. So until some events happened, the automotive industry didn't take security all too seriously. And of course, within security disciplines, it's very broad. It incorporates a lot of different technologies and elements from different fields. So if you're a network security expert, or you have experience doing radio hacking, or what do they call it? That that free like radio stuff people do. I forget what it's called, but ham radio, that's it. If you have ham radio experience, or if you've done code analysis and binary reverse engineering, all of these things are different sub-disciplines that are relevant to automotive, because cars have lots of different parts. They've got, obviously the microcontrollers running code. So if you're a reverse engineering expert, you have a field day when you get a firmware dump, and then you can find all these bugs and exploits that maybe someone can link to a network interface, and you've got a rooted car, right? That's like the dream. Or you're an expert in wireless communications, and so you can find things like vulnerabilities in Wi-Fi stacks, or you can find vulnerabilities in their Bluetooth implementation, which is something I enjoy quite a bit, is the Bluetooth. But there's so much you can do, and so everyone, I believe, has a good foothold to get involved in automotive security. Speaking of those attack surfaces, I actually added this chart this morning before hopping onto the call. It's a very nifty chart showing some of the different attack surfaces of your average vehicle. And there's quite a lot here, as you can see. I won't go through everything, of course, because there's literally 29 different example attack targets in your average modern vehicle. But you can kind of split them into three big categories, right? In-vehicle networks and the in-vehicle components, right? So these are the things like controller area network is the most common one. Any of you who've done FIRST Robotics might be familiar with CAN, actually, because CAN was originally developed by Robert Bosch, like somewhat 20, 30 years ago, and it's still in use today. And it's very helpful for establishing very easy and fast communication between two microcontrollers, right? That's what the controller area network is for, right? So CAN is the best. It's in every vehicle in the world, pretty much. It's mandated by law in the United States and in Europe, and in Japan too, I believe. So if you need to pick one technology to really get started learning on the automotive specific stuff, CAN is usually the best place to start, because once you started learning with CAN, then you can branch out into the other in-vehicle networks. So for example, LIN, the local interconnect network, is a slightly less powerful version of CAN. It was actually developed to make simple communications a little bit cheaper, right? So controllers that don't have need for robustness or reliability in their communication, for example, anything that's not safety critical, like maybe your seat, right? If you want to like change the reclining on your seat, like make it go back and forward, that's not related to the safety of your vehicle in the most direct sense, at least. So that's another different type of in-vehicle network. FlexRay and automotive Ethernet, these two are, in contrast to LIN, these are higher bandwidth than CAN. CAN is kind of the standard, right? CAN is kind of like everyone's compared to CAN. You're either faster than CAN or you're slower than CAN, because CAN does like 60–70% of everything that gets networked in the vehicle, and then the other stuff is more specialized. So FlexRay and automotive Ethernet are very high bandwidth communication protocols. FlexRay is most used for things like drive-by-wire, steer-by-wire. These are systems by which the data on the wire directly controls that aspect of the vehicle, so the throttle or the brakes or the steering. And automotive Ethernet is very similar to traditional Ethernet, and it's often used in things like sensors and cameras that have a lot of data they need to send to have processed by an ECU, which ties into things like ADAS systems, right? So if you have a self-driving car, like a Tesla, that's sending information from tons of cameras and sensors all at once, there's a good chance that there's some Ethernet in there somewhere, making sure that they have enough bandwidth to accommodate all that data. Wireless networks, I won't go too much into detail because a lot of these are common network technologies, except for DSRC. We'll talk a little bit more about that one. But Bluetooth is something you use probably in your own life very frequently. Wi-Fi, I promise everyone in this listening to this has used Wi-Fi before. Cellular data, so LTE and 5G more recently, these are also used in cars. Like I mentioned before, hotspot capabilities are being introduced into vehicles. It's a very appealing thing for people to be able to access the internet while they're in the car, and maybe they have a discounted rate for using the car's data as opposed to using their cell phone's data. You never know. GPS, of course, I for one get lost very easily. So GPS and I are good friends, and I'm sure all of you know what it is, but GPS is an important part of vehicles because well, you use your vehicle to go places and you need to know where to go. So GPS has always been an important part of the modern vehicle. And then finally, dedicated short range communication. This one is very experimental. It's not very widely used yet, but it's basically super Wi-Fi developed for use in vehicles. So it's a much stronger implementation of the Wi-Fi standard. It follows a lot of the same rules, but it's designed to have a very high bandwidth and allow for real-time vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, vehicle to everything, right? We call it V2X communications. So your car can talk to the street lamps, which can talk to the traffic lights, which can talk to the other cars, which can talk to the guy walking across the street in his cell phone. There's a lot of theoretical ways you can manifest vehicle to everything, but that DSRC is one of those technologies being used for that. And finally, of course, the software in the ECUs. At the end of the day, for those of you who've done CTFs and hack the box challenges, etc., sometimes it comes down to the actual software itself. So you need to be able to reverse engineer different compiled binaries to find hidden exploits or vulnerabilities. And knowing how to do that is, of course, an important skill in becoming a full-fledged vehicle penetration tester, if that's something you want to be. So for those of you who've done things like reverse engineering challenges, I know that there are a lot of websites for people to practice their binary reverse engineering skills. That's a very important skill in the automotive industry, and being able to look at a different compiled binary and recognize, okay, it's using this instruction set, I can use these tools and these tools. If this is something you're interested in, you have a great chance of succeeding in automotive security. So I mentioned a couple of recent events that kind of started this boom in automotive security over the last few years. So I'm going to start with the fact that a big part of automotive security and cybersecurity in general is that it's always evolving, right? So following news surrounding automotive security is a big deal. And I've got some examples here of important news articles or publications that have changed the automotive security industry. It's important to know that the vulnerability used to exploit the vehicles in the bottom left were disclosed in contexts completely unrelated to automotive. They were Bluetooth vulnerabilities, not automotive specific ones. So here, let me pull the laser pointer out so you can actually see what I'm talking about. It's a little bit hard to read because the text is a little bit small, but Tencent Keen Security Lab Keen Security Lab is a lab owned by the large Chinese company Tencent that does research on a lot of different security aspects, but automotive is one that they're particularly strong in. They actually released they did some responsible disclosure a couple of years ago, or actually, no, this was not even a couple of years ago, this was last year. They revealed that they were able to basically get root on some Toyota/Lexus vehicles that were manufactured outside of Japan. And this was because they were using Bluetooth versions that weren't up to date. They were using some Bluetooth versions that were vulnerable to a very high profile set of Bluetooth vulnerabilities that were released back in like 2017. This suite of vulnerabilities is called Blueborn. And while most devices are more or less patched at this point, these Toyota vehicles happen to be using a head unit that wasn't. They had an old version of Bluetooth, which allowed them to be exploited by these remote code execution vulnerabilities. And from there, they were then able to reflash different ECUs inside the device and then get access to the CAN bus. And from there, they had a lot of control, and they were even able to establish backdoors into these vehicles that they could then later log into over Wi-Fi, which has a wider range than Bluetooth, for example. So a lot of potential for disruption here, but this is some of the news that you see coming out in the automotive security industry more and more frequently as time goes on. Tesla actually also had a big reveal or kind of disclosure within 2021, I believe. It was very early in 2021 where some researchers showed that the key fobs could actually be cloned very easily without a lot of user intervention. Let me just check my time. Okay, yeah, I don't want to go over my time. So let me just kind of wrap things up on this slide. Up here on the top left, this is the article that started it all, right? You can play a drinking game every time you go to an automotive security conference, right? Anytime someone mentions the Jeep hack, right? They're talking about this, right? Hackers remotely kill a Jeep with me in it, right? On the highway. So this is an article that details the kind of hallmark event of the automotive cybersecurity industry. Two brilliant researchers, Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek, spent about 2 years researching the Jeep Cherokee like vehicle model series. And they found that they actually were able to, through the cellular network provider, network, they were able to log into vehicles at a very high privilege level and essentially just reflash the software in these ECUs and control the vehicle after some bullying, right? So they basically showed this poor reporter, they had him rent a Jeep Cherokee that they had never touched before. And while he's driving this car on the highway, they log into the car and they pull a couple of pranks on him. They turn on the music, they change the display on the head unit to a picture of them. And then they killed the brakes. And you realize, well, hold on a second, that is actually incredibly dangerous. Because what if instead of killing the brakes, he had just said, okay, now turn left, right? You're on the highway. You just either drive right into the meridian or into another car's path, right? It's quite dangerous, isn't it? So this is kind of the what can I call it? The stereotypical worst case scenario is what happened here back in 2015, I believe. Don't quote me on the date. I forget what year it happened in. Yeah, 2015. And then over here on the right side, oh, my camera's focusing. Okay. On the right side, I've got two examples of industry standards and, well, more government standards that have come about because of automotive security. This industry standard here is the ISO SAE 21434 that is currently being used as the standard for vehicle security all over the world. And on the bottom, you have the United Nations actually published a regulation last year, essentially requiring automotive security to be a priority for all countries that are signatories. Interestingly, the United States and Canada are not on the committee for this UN ECE regulation, but they will, most of the manufacturers there will be implementing security nonetheless, but just an interesting tidbit. But if you're interested in learning more about these, there's a lot of information online. I do want to just keep going because the last part's a little bit more interesting. So if you wanted to start a career in automotive security, what are the best steps for you to take? So a big part of getting a career in information security, of course, especially automotive, is being able to find new information on your own and learn new skills. And because automotive security is still a relatively new field, there isn't an established path for your career. But in general, if I had to do it very generally, you could do automotive red teaming or automotive blue teaming or organizational / executive work in automotive security. This is, of course, things like ensuring standards compliance and making sure that processes and standards are followed throughout development processes. If you wanted to work in an automotive OEM or even as a consultant for some smaller suppliers that need help complying with different security standards and regulations, these are all different career options. My career personally has evolved into a mix of red team and organizational. I do consulting both for technical consulting as in vehicle penetration tests and also standards compliance and training for customers. I don't do any development though. I hate that stuff. I can't do blue teaming. It's not for me. But if you like that, more power to you. No disrespect. No disrespect. And this is actually something that I saw a couple of months ago. The University of Michigan Dearborn, my alma mater, actually has received some funding for automotive security research from NIST, I believe. So I don't know how well the, I guess, research goes between, U of M Dearborn and U of M Ann Arbor, because I believe a lot of the students listening are U of M Ann Arbor students. It's my impression of this, I think. Well, anyway, this is something that's happening in Michigan, right? So if you want to get involved, I'm sure there's a way you can reach out to the different professors involved and have an opportunity for research in automotive security specifically. I've met Professor Malik myself personally, and I think he's a great guy. So I definitely recommend learning under him. And then finally, I have a couple of resources that I'd recommend everyone look into. So the Car Hacking Village is the one on the top right with the edgy skull-looking logo. This is an organization that's devoted to sharing information about vehicle security and car hacking with people all over the world. So we go to different security events, DEF CON, for example, Hack in the Box, and we basically provide an automotive aspect. I volunteer there quite frequently. We'll have usually a capture the flag and lectures, etc., for everyone to learn, and of course, free to participate. ASRG, like I mentioned earlier, is another worldwide organization that shares a lot of information about automotive security. They have a YouTube channel, especially because of the COVID-19 situation. We've put all of our meetings and lectures online, so you can, of course, go back and watch all of those. The Cyber Auto Challenge is a event that used to be held every year, but it's been on hold for the last year because of the global pandemic. But it's a program where students get invited to Michigan for a week every summer to be able to learn automotive security concepts, so on and so forth. It's sponsored by the SAE too. And then I have here listed a couple of resources that are more technical. So if you want a head start actually learning how to do some of the stuff, the Car Hacker's Handbook and Hacking Connected Cars are two books I would highly recommend. And DEF CON's YouTube channel posts a lot of the Car Hacking Village videos every year. So I definitely recommend looking at those two for some of the most cutting edge research. So I think I'm running out of time, so I don't want to, I guess, overshoot things, but this is the end of my presentation. So I've got listed on the screen my own personal email address. If you have questions, I don't mind. Just please don't sign me up for any strange newsletters. That's my only request. But feel free to email me if you have any questions, or if you want to learn more. I'm perfectly happy to share these slides too. They're not secret, right? And of course, my Twitter handle. I don't tweet a lot of security related stuff, so approach that vector with a grain of salt. But I do reshare security things from now and then, and especially when it comes to automotive, because it's my field of most interest. So thank you all so much for listening. And yeah, any questions? I think, do we have a question and answer session or?
Yeah. So it looks like we already have a question in chat. So what are some similarities and differences with automotive security research in Japan compared to the US?
Good question. So I think that when it comes to the actual research, so the people doing the technical work, automotive security has two main sides to the industry. There's the automotive cybersecurity industry, and then you have the car hackers. You know, these car hacker people are the people who find everything wrong with vehicles, and they're not doing it because they work for a car company and it's their job to find these. They're doing it because they want to. They want to hack new features into their car. They want to toy with their cars and find ways to break their kind of established programming. They want to break the rules. So the car hacking scene in Japan, like the car tuning, for example, is a popular application of that. Like people hacking different extended features into their car without having to pay for them, right? This is something that exists here in Japan and in the United States, and has been part of the car hacking community for a while. On the automotive cybersecurity side, like the more industry-oriented, procedural, even like government tie-in stuff, Japan has been very fast and very slow. So it's the Japanese government has put cybersecurity requirements into the law, but they haven't really gotten exercised very well yet because it's still very new. This regulation for the United Nations was only ratified last year. And so this regulation, of course, the United Nations can't force any country to do anything, but the countries that are signatories will often adopt the same language and requirements into their own laws. So the Japanese government has already put that into law in Japan, that before a vehicle can be sold, it needs to undergo certain tests, certain cybersecurity vehicle type authentication, right? You need to have like a certificate saying like this vehicle has gone through the appropriate cybersecurity assurance measures before it can be sold, as of, starting in 2022, I believe is the current start date for that. So the way this is different from the United States is the United States is, like I said, it's not a signatory of the United Nations regulation. So the laws are taking a lot longer in the United States. I believe there's 2 laws that have been stuck, in one in the Senate, one in the House, for like the last 4 or 5 years. I don't really know if they've gone anywhere since, but they're kind of dragging their feet on the legal side of things. But the car hacking scene and the actual car hackers in the US are, of course, very powerful. There's a huge industry around reverse engineering vehicle data. One of my old bosses is actually a veteran there. He's a great guy. His name is Robert. Find him if you can. But yeah, that's, I think, the biggest difference between the Japanese and United States markets. Hopefully I didn't go too off track, but
Yeah, no, thank you. That was great. And how similar or different are the environments between manufacturers? So for example, between Ford, GM, Volkswagen, etc.
it's a great question. So obviously there are going to be certain areas where they're very different, but if you consider that each automotive OEM, no OEM, except maybe Tesla, develops every single piece of equipment or hardware or ECU that goes inside their vehicle. They outsource a lot to different suppliers. So different tier one suppliers, of course, make devices and they sell these devices to different OEMs. So you may run into a situation where you're doing a vehicle assessment on a, I don't know, a Subaru vehicle, right? You're doing a vehicle assessment on the Subaru vehicle and you realize, okay, well, this DCM unit or this head unit or this telematics unit is made by a tier one supplier, say Denso or Bosch or Continental. You take note of it in this model number or whatever you do your work. And then maybe 2 months later, you're working on a Ford vehicle and you realize, hey, wait a minute. The same Denso module I saw in the last car is in here too. Maybe the same things work on it, right? So this is the one of the advantages the automotive industry has against hackers is the genetic diversity of vehicle fleets all over the world, right? Every manufacturer makes their vehicles a little bit differently. Every manufacturer supplies their parts from different places. They write their code differently. There's enough differences that one rootkit, right? One exploit that gets root on a given vehicle model year, model type won't affect more than that specific vehicle type, right? It's very good because if you see like recently with things like SolarWinds and the Microsoft Exchange hacks, right? These are such huge, large scale problems because these two programs were basically ubiquitous. Everyone was using the same program. And that's why it's such a large scale problem, right? The automotive industry is a little bit different. So the different vehicle manufacturers are different enough that there is a lot of effort in adapting one vehicle's exploitation kit to another one. But as I mentioned before, they do often supply from the same suppliers. So you may find different components that are common between different manufacturers.
Thank you. Yeah. And so I guess one final question, where do you see the automotive security industry moving, and what are some struggles you guys are still having?
So I think that as different countries begin to implement their own versions of the United Nations regulation, more and more countries are going to start demanding, there's going to be a need for obviously experienced engineers. There's also going to be a need for, how should I say, auditors, right? People that can do a security assessment, maybe not even from a technical perspective, but to be able to monitor the manufacturing process and the development process. And this is probably going to be more useful in countries that don't have a lot of vehicle manufacturers themselves. They import vehicles from other countries, for example. Like, I don't know, I couldn't tell you exactly if there's like a specific country I have in mind that just doesn't make their own cars, but anywhere that this anywhere that the regulation applies that doesn't make their own vehicles, they need to have people working in the government that can approve a vehicle's cybersecurity case and say, okay, this has been properly done. And so there's going to be a lot of different jobs opening up in automotive cybersecurity all over the world. I think the biggest trouble is that there aren't enough people doing automotive security. Like, I'm not trying to flex when I say this, but like the recruiters will not leave you alone because there are very few people doing this work. I'm not, again, this is something I want more people to get into because there's a need in the industry. And at the end of the day, if my phone gets hacked, all right, worst case scenario, they take my credit card number and I need to talk to my bank and make sure any fraudulent purchases are canceled. But if a car gets hacked to the extent that like actual control of the vehicle is possible, that you're talking about a safety situation. You're talking about someone using this car as a weapon, or as a, God forbid, like the CIA assassinating people by hacking their cars and just like crashing and say, oh no, what a tragedy, and just like walking away, right? This is like, obviously you can use your imagination here, but it's something that's important to everyone. Because maybe I don't drive a car very often here in Japan because I don't need one, but I still walk on the same street cars drive on. I don't need a car going berserk while I'm walking down the street because some script kiddie in Vietnam or or North Korea or China was just like, hey, I'm gonna just mess with this vehicle's transmission or something, right? That's obviously a very exaggerated example, but yeah, it's something that relates to the public safety of everyone all over the world. And so I think that the biggest challenge we face is not having enough people in the industry. And it's a very beneficial industry to get into, especially at this time, because it's still pretty new and you get to be one of those hipsters who, like, I was there before it was cool kind of thing. So I definitely recommend exploring a career in automotive security. And if it's not for you, I understand. Personally, I hate vehicles and I hate cars. And that's why I work in this industry, because I get to hack them. It's like, yeah, I'm very vindictive about it.
Yeah, well, it definitely sounds like it's an emerging field, and we definitely need more people in it. And for cybersecurity in general, not only cars, but it's definitely an important field, and it's definitely a public safety issue. So
Absolutely.
yeah, so with that, we'll wrap up our talk, and thank you for coming. We really appreciate your talk.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you all. Have a great event, everyone.